Hi everybody, and welcome to week 10 in EDE 201. This week's module focuses on education as a solution to many of the women's issues that we've discussed so far this semester. This week's module is very text heavy this time around, with the exception of one video, so there's a lot to read, and I really want you to think about everything that we've learned so far and how education fits into addressing these issues. This week we're going to look at education as a solution, but also start to jump into the possible barriers to education. So just because it might be a good solution doesn't mean it's easy to provide, or that the solution itself doesn't pose other problems that we need to consider. So it's a lot more complex than that, so I want you to keep this complexity in your head when you're reading, thinking about not just saying, oh great, education, that's perfect, we'll fix it, but thinking about all the other possibilities that come along with that. So you're going to start this week with reading Chapter 10 in Half the Sky. So we're jumping around a bit. Last 2 weeks we've read Chapter 11 and 12 to read about microfinance. Now we're going back to read Chapter 10. You're also welcome to read Chapter 9 as well. We're not going to read that in the course, but if you've been following along with the book and you really want to get the full story, I highly recommend it, but not required. Chapter 10 discusses educating girls in particular and how this can have a positive impact on their lives, but also on many of the issues that we've learned about so far. So the impact on individual women and on kind of these broader issues. This chapter does a really good job of describing unique ways that countries and organizations have tried to get girls to attend school and stay in school. And we're not just talking about college here, we're talking about elementary school, middle school, high school. School that we sort of take for granted in the United States because it is required that we attend, but that's not the case in other countries. So this chapter does a good job of kind of describing how we can get girls to stay in school. Another interesting point that this chapter makes, though, is how sometimes you might have unexpected consequences that come from providing aid to other countries. And sometimes we neglect the negative impact that sometimes our actions have, even if we think our actions are being helpful. So it's really interesting to kind of read about, again, that complexity that comes with trying to help others and things that we have to consider. So this is going to be a theme going forward in our class as we finish up this semester as well. So keep that in your head. So after Half the Sky, I want you to read two other short articles. The first one I want you to read is called Education. It's not just about the boys, get the girls into school. It's from Newsweek, a Newsweek article from 2008. It reinforces some of what we've discussed already about how to get girls to use their education more productively than boys, as the article states. So it's very similar to our microfinance discussion about empowering women economically because they help their community with their money in different ways than men do. This article describes how women use their education to benefit their community as well. So you can sort of make those connections. It's a really good complement to what we've read so far, and it'll be a really good complement to Half the Sky. And also a really good resource to those that are working on your regional issues papers. If you chose that particular assignment that's due at the end of the semester, and you really need to talk about how education can be a solution, and this is a really good resource that you can use. The other short article I want you to read is called The Decay or Disintegration of the Educational System. This is very different than the other two things you're going to read. This poses a very different look at education in other countries. Let's say we all agree that education is a great solution to many issues that we've talked about in the course. This article shows us the barriers that we still need to address to be able to provide this solution to other people. The biggest cost and how difficult it can, the biggest is cost. So that's the biggest barrier that we run into with providing education, and how difficult it can be to educate any student in poverty, boy or girl. So, of course, educating students in poverty is a huge problem in the United States as well. Just to give you a little bit of background information, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are often years behind their higher SES peers in academic achievement. Why is this? This is research proven. Because they might have less exposure to experiences that develop essential prior knowledge. Everybody, in order to learn, you connect every new experience that you learn with something that you've learned before. So students in poverty have fewer opportunities to develop prior knowledge and background knowledge. They're also less likely to receive, students like this are less likely to receive the best teachers because the jobs in schools where have a large population of students in poverty are they're harder jobs to do. You get fewer resources, you probably get paid less, and so sometimes teachers, if they have a choice as to where they want to work, don't want to work in these places and educate these students. And it's not It's for their own livelihood, right? Sometimes students or teachers will work there, but then they'll leave because they are just coming up, they're just struggling with the lack of resources, the lack of money. So sometimes they might leave mid-year. And of course, these students are ones that need the good teachers the most. So this becomes a big problem. And students from high poverty backgrounds are also less likely to believe that they can change anything about their government or their community. So these are often described as gaps. So when students in poverty are well behind students from high SES backgrounds, it's called the achievement gap. When students are well less likely to believe that they can impact their community than their higher SES peers, it's called the civic empowerment gap. So these students tend to be part of these gaps, and this can be very, very problematic and a big barrier to education in this country. Children in poverty are also less likely to be in stable environments with a consistent primary caregiver. They miss out on time to talk and bond with adults, and this is very, very important because talking leads to better vocabulary development. So if you have a little child at home or you end up talking to an infant and you feel kind of silly because the infant can't talk back, that's a good thing because you're helping even develop their vocabulary development from a very small age. But students in poverty get less of that interaction time with adults. So why is this? Often it's because adults are having to take time away from their children to provide for their children, to feed their children. So there's sometimes a misconception among those in the education circles that, parents from high poverty backgrounds don't care about their children. But there's so many other explanations for this that are related to poverty. For example, you could judge a parent who doesn't read to their kids before bedtime. After all, we know that even if you're not in education, this is a really good practice to do for your students to help bond and develop that vocabulary. But parents might not be the ones putting their kids to bed. They might have to work long hours to make money to feed their children. They might have to work an odd shift because that's the only job that they're able to find or get. And so this is not a result of what we might call bad parenting, but just like a larger economic system of poverty. So it's important to recognize this. And in the end, the kids end up suffering. Children in poverty deal with stressors that other children just don't deal with. They might be more likely to be hungry, right, or have anxiety from this unstable environment that they have. This might lead to violence or disruptive behavior in the student. In fact, these students might be dealing with the fact that they have adult-like responsibilities. Many of my students, when I taught, they would go home at night and have to make dinner and put their siblings to bed because parents were out working, and so they did not have time to do their own homework. This is kind of stress that children shouldn't have to endure, but yet many kids in poverty deal with this every single day. And as we all know, stress is bad for your brain. Maybe you didn't know that, so don't be too stressed out because stress is very bad for your brain. It can actually disrupt learning and make it difficult for you to learn. And students, when they're very young, they don't know how to deal with these stressors, and they might react in disruptive ways. So oftentimes students in poverty or from high poverty environments in school are often seen as bad kids or outrageous kids, kids that can't behave in a classroom, but there's so many other reasons for this that are related back to poverty. It all comes back. It's a huge barrier to educating students. In the United States, just to give you a little background for those of you that are not in education, schools are funded in Michigan and other states around the country by something called per pupil funding, as well as property taxes. This is kind of essential for you to know this. It's related to thinking about barriers to education locally. So in Michigan, for example, each school gets about $7,000 per student that goes there, right from the state. So the state will, if your school has 300 kids, the state will give you 7,000 times 300. This is used for day-to-day resources, and it's needed to educate students. So busing, keeping the lights on, paying teachers, buying books, the day-to-day operations of a school. They get that money. Then each individual school district adds to those funds, to the per pupil funds, with property taxes from that district, from anybody that lives there. So areas with higher property taxes have more money to spend on their students. Even though each student starts with an equal amount, so each school district starts with that $7,000 per student, the difference in property taxes still results in huge inequalities across different school districts in Michigan and in other states as well. So many of you have probably experienced this in your everyday life or with people that you know that go to different school districts than the one you attended. For example, property taxes in Novi, where I live, are much higher than in Metro Detroit. So schools here are better. They have more resources anyway. If you want to equate that with better, they have more resources. So low-income students are often concentrated in urban areas like Detroit and places that don't have as high as property taxes. So parents can actually choose to move their kids to a different school if they don't like the district where they live, right? But the more parents that do that means that that school district is losing that $7,000 for each kid that leaves. So it just makes a huge, bigger financial mess. So this is a long way around this, but you're going to read about how cost and poverty is a huge barrier to education around the world, but then I also really want you to understand that it is a huge barrier to education in the United States as well. In my opinion, poverty is the biggest educational issue for boys and girls. This isn't a women's issue. This is a everybody issue in the United States and all over the world. And there are many of us in this class that are going into education. So this week I want to hear from you guys about how you think you can work with these issues in your future classroom. So if you're doing a discussion post or a reading reflection, I really want you to think about that if you're going into teaching, because you're going to have no control over the socioeconomic status of your students. You can't change necessarily their poverty status, but how can you work with this? Even if you're not going into education, there are many of you in this class that are parents. So what can you do to help schools provide a quality education for your own children? If we're not parents or future teachers, we're still community members. And maybe you contribute to property taxes in your area, or you will be soon. So therefore, you contribute to schools. You might vote in local elections, so you have a say in how the school district runs where you live, even if you don't have kids in school or not going to be a teacher. So what can you do to ensure quality education in your community? What could we be doing at U of M Flint? I really want to hear your thoughts on this. It's going to be a really interesting topic for this week. So my point is the quality of education affects all of us, even if we're not going to work in that field or even if we don't end up working with children. It affects all of us as citizens. So it's very, very important. And finally, I want you to watch a video about Malala Yousafzai. The Taliban prevented women from attending school in Pakistan, where Malala was from, and she and her friends protested this, and you'll hear her talk about in the video about how she didn't realize how much she loved school until she wasn't allowed to go, and this made her a target for being so outspoken, and actually she was shot in the head by the Taliban when she was 15 years old for being so outspoken. She survived, and she has since become, a speaker all over, talking about her experience and the importance of education, especially education for women. So the clip I'm about to show you it's in our module, is from her most recent appearance on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart this fall. So if any of you watch The Daily Show, you'll know that Jon Stewart's interviews are usually very light and funny, but he is completely speechless listening to her. So that shows you kind of like how powerful she is, and she's only 16 years old at the time of this clip. So it just amazes me to listen to her talk. She's given many, many inspirational speeches, including to the United Nations. So this one, why would I pick this one? This one in particular really struck a chord with me. You'll see the passion that she has talking about this, and yeah, it just sort of moved me to tears. So I really wanted to share it with you. If you're interested in her, there's a lot more you can learn about her for sure. If you do a quick Google search, you can probably pull up a lot of her different speeches that she's given. She's quite a fascinating character. Especially listen for, in this particular video, how she believes in pacifism and education as opposed to violence and war. It's a really powerful part of this video. She also has a autobiography out right now, so if you're doing a book review assignment, I highly recommend picking that up and reading it. I have not read it yet, but I think just listening to her talk, I'm sure it'll be a wonderful book. So remember to get started working on, speaking of final projects and assignments, get started working on those for the end of the course. We're definitely getting close to the end here, about a month to go. Remember, if you chose the Women's Educational Center events, that you need to make a plan to attend. You're running out of opportunities to attend these events. There aren't that many left that are applicable to attend for our course. There are quite a few next week for Human Trafficking Week around campus, and I mean the week of the 24th, not this week coming up. So take a look at that calendar in the assignment sheet on Blackboard. Pick out the 2 you want to attend if you're choosing that assignment, and make sure to get on that. I really want you to make sure you're reading very carefully the directions to every single assignment so that you know what you have to do and you can budget your time accordingly. So if whatever assignment you chose, read it now. Make sure you know exactly what has to be done so that you know exactly, you can figure out exactly how long that might take you. I'll probably next week be posting some other videos related to some of the assignments that are left that'll be optional for you to watch if you're choosing those assignments. If you chose the reading reflections assignment and you're writing about this week's module, remember those are due Sunday, March 23rd, 11:59 as always. And same goes for the discussion posts and the discussion comments. Get those in by Sunday. And tweet away this week. I'm really interested to hear what you think about Malala and about our education topics. So have a fabulous week, and I will talk to you soon.